So, Coventry. We've been working really hard over the last 5 years to enhance the student experience. It's really interesting that now that gets, for anyone that picks up the Times Higher, for those few of us that do these days, it gets a few interesting comments and says that we're really focused on satisfying the students. We're only interested in that very instrumental act of making the students happy. Absolute nonsense. What we're really interested in is engaged students, students who participate in their education, whatever their subject area might be, who then go on to be employable. So we're really focused on two things, which is the experience that we provide to our students and the way in which we deliver the education, words which I'm sure will cause some controversy later on, but the way in which the only thing that we can focus on really is the quality of the teaching, the way in which we engage, interest and stimulate our students. And so we've put an awful lot of effort into understanding how our students learn and understanding how teaching and learning actually takes place, particularly the teaching side, so that the learning is facilitated. Yes, we've done quite a lot of work on the estate. It's worth saying, since we're in this magnificent building, this magnificent space, which I have to say does give you an awful lot of advantages when you have the good fortune to be able to have something like this to work with. It really makes a difference. I think the thing that I would say about our journey at Coventry over the last 5 years is that we have moved from a student satisfaction rating of about 79%. We were in that sort of 80th, 85th sort of point in the league tables, and I know lots of people dislike the league tables, but they're there, they exist, and we use them to our advantage, we hope. And we then realised that we had no way of measuring, no way of knowing what our students were really thinking. And so we put in place a very significant and extensive programme of finding out that we talk to our students in all sorts of formats on a very regular basis, and we survey them. Some people say we survey them too much. Last year we collected 175,000 survey instruments that we processed and we analysed and we looked at. And this whole idea of big data, linking our student population data with our student satisfaction information and looking for trends, looking for patterns. Where is the dissatisfaction? What's leading to that dissatisfaction? But particularly looking at the qualitative feedback that our students give to us and making sure that we take some action on the back of it, that we do something. We don't just say that we're listening to them and gather some information and then do nothing about it, but we actively go back to them really quickly and we tell them what we think, what they've told us they thought, what we think we can do about it, and how we're going to take action on the back of that, so that we're in constant conversation with our students. That conversation means that we also work really closely with our students' union, that we work really closely with our student reps. We have 1,100 students who volunteer their time to be representatives for their courses and to work with our faculty teams. And we do things like, okay, it might be really corny, it might be really cheap, but making sure that the faculty chair, the student who's elected to represent the faculty, meets with the dean weekly for a cup of tea and actually has a conversation about how the whole process and how the place is being run, making the students understand that it's their education and we want them as active participants in their experience. All of that work, with a lot of other initiatives, has come together to allow us to, well, one, it's allowed us to achieve what the Times described as the best student experience in the country. Fantastic. But it's also allowed us to then work with our students in other ways and to move on to initiatives like the one that Jonathan's going to spend some time talking about, which is the Disruptive Media Lab, where we can really focus some activity and some resource into the student population, and we can work with them in conversation to design space in the way that they want to use space, rather than the way in which we would have perhaps pushed the space out to them in the previous times, and that we can make sure that that they are really engaged in the whole process. One thing I think before I hand over to Jonathan, I'd like to say is, in my experience, the students are really focused on teaching. They're really interested in being excited by us as their tutors and their lecturers. They want to learn, they want to find out, and they want to be part of our subject areas. We are responsible when that doesn't work out properly. Sure, we can blame the students for all sorts of things quite often, and we do it. However, let's always look back at ourselves and make sure that we're providing them with the opportunities to be engaged, the opportunities to really get into our subject. And on that basis, we try to see our students as, again, a little bit corny, but professionals in training with the tutors as professionals in practice, trying to create the idea of a community where we all come together to share understanding and to share progress. And that way, we believe we can really move the whole agenda on, and it allows us to have a much more sophisticated conversation when we come to specific initiatives and talking about pedagogy, because they can become active participants in the conversation rather than simply being rather more passive as we may have treated them in the past. Teaching and learning, therefore, is really the focus for Coventry. Yes, we've put some money into buildings. Yes, we try to focus on some facilities, but in the end, it's about the quality of the classroom experience, and it's about making sure that what the student gets is so exciting that they're just so motivated that they want to spend time with us, and they want to be in the studio, and they want to be in the laboratory, and they want to be in the workshop alongside us to find out more. And hand over to Jonathan, who will talk about our Disruptive Media Lab.
I'm Jonathan Shaw. I have kind of multiple roles at Coventry. The one in the context of speaking today really is about co-director of the Disruptive Media Learning Lab. I sort of find talking about a lot of the things we do a bit mundane and a bit kind of abstract. So my son, just before the summer, asked me what it was that I did. And then he added the other bit, which was why. Now, my mind immediately then thought, well, clearly I'm your father. And then he promptly reminds me that I seem to spend all my time kind of working on this book, so I'm therefore an author. Then, as I often joke into many meetings that I go into, that I have over 12,000 unread emails, so I'm equally an administrator. But I got into this because I liked making images and exploring what it meant to be a photographer. Simultaneous to that was my role and engagement as what I now term being an educator. We know inside universities there is this sense of what research means. And so for us, the Centre for Disruptive Media is our space where we can intellectually and practically explore this transformation that's going on at this moment in time. For me as a practitioner in the early 90s, this is how I started off my practice. I'm sure people still have this vague recollection of kind of these 35 millimeter transparencies. The work that I made ran the full length of a 120 kind of medium format film. So that was me trying to get work. You know, we have these incubators that we see in this space, but my business plan was kind of flawed. Nobody was going to employ me, give me thousands of pounds to do these things that I love, if my image was always going to be 2 millimeters high. Now, we all are familiar, I think, with this transformation, and Adobe tools have been a significant player in this space. But that same image that existed for me trying to get work, trying to convince people to invest in what I wanted to do, can suddenly now be a 60-meter print by 3 meters in kind of galleries, and really start exploring the ideas that I had when I started trying to begin this, this journey. Do people know what this slide is? Anybody got a clue? Anybody a photographer in the audience here? A couple of kind of delicate hands kind of going up. You surely must know what this slide is. Before your time. Very good. This was Kodak's first digital camera. Now, we're all familiar with the story of Kodak and how it invented the technology that ultimately led to its demise. I don't think we're that far away when we consider ourselves as educators, because this same device that I have on the top here can untap and unlock a whole bunch of things that I have, as a traditional lecturer, meant to be stood in front of my students to do. But I don't see that these days as something to worry about. I think, the stuff that we're doing at Coventry actually says, no, if this is our starting point, where is it that we can go? So it is this idea of kind of having a new mindset. But there is this double kind of inclination here. You are, inside institutions, going to find barriers. But I think what has been really exciting and great of working at Coventry is they don't see those as the goal. The goal is about changing mindset. So specifically, this kind of example in terms of technology, those people I'm fairly sure are familiar with this. I can't get access to the software, I can't get in the lab, my work's all on that computer because it's the one by the window, and there's just not enough computers with the right software in this university. Now this environment here, and similarly to Coventry, sort of started rethinking that, because this same sense that we see in terms of education around scarcity doesn't quite work anymore. The idea that we invest as a university, one machine per 20 students, kind of feels a little bit out of date. So as a media department, when in my role, one of my other hats as associate head for media, we were reinvesting in our kind of video edit suite. So it was the transition a number of years ago into HD. So we were going to spend £750,000 on 30 computers to give our students this experience. Kind of doesn't seem to work out when our department is around 600 in size. So, and we were kind of bucking the trend, so the demand was going up, it wasn't going down. Simple bit of maths. Over a cup of coffee with my colleague Sean, a media services guy, Greg, we said £1,000 a head. If we start thinking like that, how could we revisit this? So we came up with the labinabag scheme, which meant that every single student not only had access to the technology, but they had access to a personalized version of that technology. So that same sense, I want to work here, I want to tailor my software like this, I want to customize it, meant that is what they were able to do. And rather than skewing kind of the curriculum and what we were teaching, we embedded things such as the Adobe Certified Associate Scheme in the Advantage module, which is a university-wide program offering every single student access to the same set of modules. So in other words, it's no longer the privileged access for creative arts, design and media students who can suddenly use Adobe. The license that we set up meant it was across 3,500 computers in the entire university. So a program that traditionally had 30 students on it suddenly now has 500 students enrolled. Now, if we can do that inside our classrooms, we were thinking, this is kind of quite interesting. So we started off on this approach called around open education, and SUGISC has subsequently kind of referred to us as being open boundary. So in other words, not worrying about these walls that is inside a classroom or the walls of an institution, so that we can truly realize this idea of what it means to teach in a hybrid space. So yes, as we have here, we have the classrooms. We went for red chairs rather than black to try and put a bit of colour in there. But I think now, increasingly, we see that more and more, that universities are creating spaces such as this, that we can have flexible tables that move. But for us, kind of 6 years ago, this was a key transition from that traditional lecture theatre. But similarly, everywhere I go, I tend to be on my kind of device, which means I kind of see that I'm learning every day. So our classrooms could now equally look like that. So it can be on a train, it can be in the classroom, but things such as Phonar or Picbod now exist like this. So we have what we see as the global classroom, which sees people like Wired talking about us shaking up photo education. I can add into this, which I did remove, that the photography course is now similarly kind of regarded as #1 in the UK by The Guardian. But the starting point for this was saying, actually, my mind has a certain amount of information it can hold on to. I think some people can hold on to far more. But if we're interested in asking that question and essentially building this community that Ian was talking about, we were finding over 1 million people were equally interested in answering that question and exploring it together. So as we see with people like Stephen Downes talking about the abundance of knowledge, well, how are we going to keep up? And of course you can't. And if our starting point for education is that, then perhaps we can do something interesting. So the Disruptive Media Learning Lab is our way at a university level of kind of exploring this idea that we set off on inside the photography course, across the department, inside the School of Art and Design, to now think, well, actually, this is something that is much bigger than just kind of my particular kind of faculty. So We set up the Disruptive Media Learning Lab earlier on this year, but people often, as I've already done today, talk about that in terms of the smartphones, that kind of technology that you have in your pocket. But please let us not forget that the book is probably one of the most significant pieces of disruptive technology that has changed politics, culture, society, everything. It's very easy to see it as this lockdown piece of information on a bookshelf from where we're coming now. We know the media landscape is no longer these kind of discrete bundles of kind of information. They're now connected, they're now kind of converged. But we can't ignore the fact that when our students are coming into our classrooms, there are over 2 billion smartphones available globally. That's what Adobe's kind of records are telling us in their research. But when we go in the classroom, how much do we still seek to hold on to this linear kind of space? Now, the things that we're seeking to do inside the lab is to regard it perhaps more of a kind of connected and mediated learning. So we're not saying it's not one thing or another. Often I use this term kind of either and. So actually it's about that we'll become aware of the space that we're teaching in. But perhaps equally, it's our role as kind of educators perhaps becomes more changed to something that I was aware of and consider in terms of kind of the art gallery, of being a curator, where actually my role as an educator is to pull various sources of information together and to create an experience inside the space that I'm seeing as the learning environment. Now, that could be here or it could be somewhere different. But similarly, we mustn't forget that institutions, we have a role around scholarship, but locking it away inside publishing houses, we don't believe is the right way of working. So working under Creative Commons often, and with the open access kind of movement, we kind of published in our research centre of disruptive media, kind of 21 books in 8 months. Not the traditional 1 book in 2 years, 21 books in 8 months. That were from a range of kind of scholars exploring kind of life in general and in relation to science. And I think, I use the term educator at the start of this talk because I think, I've never seen my job as being a person who makes lectures. I stutter and stumble more often than not. But if I see my role as being an educator, we have this parallel with people who are candlestick makers or makers of light. Slightly cheesy, I appreciate. The one I sort of prefer is it isn't our role in coming from a kind of a media department where it is all about kind of building and drawing the map. That feels to me quite definitive. It actually says it's complete, it's static, it's not this fluid movement. So our lab now no longer has lecture theatres. We have a hill. We have Ian here in our grassed area. And these aren't just about creating kind of creative environments which sort of change that perception. We suddenly, every single member of staff or students going into this space suddenly become aware of their being in a context. These rooms, I feel, are quite bland. So what happens when you suddenly put your artificial turf in there? Or we create an internal kind of garden and the carpet tiles that Ian hates. Or we put these spaces such as the project rooms, which have kind of this inbuilt kind of smell from the OSB board. Which for me, I think, and what I talked about in the book that my son decided to draw on my Father's Day card, was this idea that perhaps what we need to consider our role being around understanding how we navigate this changing landscape in terms of being a compass. So if we think of our students as algorithms, this idea of a process of problem solving, it perhaps gives us a new way of thinking. So perhaps that this can be our kind of new classroom, the disruptive classroom. Thank you. One of the things that we're conscious of in here is we have one perspective. Ian oversees the entire university. This is a few kind of examples of some of the things that we've been doing at Coventry. However, just simply coming to something and preaching at you feels a little bit the wrong way around. So I think we're hoping to engage in a conversation. Ian, I was expecting this the other way around. Ian has got a microphone. So we're happy to take questions and explore and talk about different elements of either things that we've talked about or problems that you're kind of finding where you are.
Could you explain a bit more about the lab in the bag concept?
Yep. So I was initially just going to say, well, it's a lab and it's in the bag. you know, traditionally, so in my media department, we would set aside rooms that were lecture theatres, kind of workshops, seminar rooms, kind of computer rooms, the video edit suite, offline, online. So the lab in the bag scheme was quite simply that thing of us turning around, let's say in this scenario, to Ian and saying, Ian, can we have £750,000, please? Yes, it will be costed over 3 years, and yes, it is just going to give you 30 computers. Didn't feel like an argument that was kind of current and relevant. So the simple, and you know, it was much longer and far more drawn out than that, was we wanted to introduce a one-to-one scheme for our students. So every student receives a MacBook Pro, preloaded with the creative software, Adobe software, and we roll that out. It is quite as simple as that. What it means is, if the students are in a room, this idea of being active and conscious of the space that you're working in is in the same way if you're teaching on the grass or you're teaching on the hill, you can't ignore that space. So if all of our students are sat on their laptops, perhaps it's telling us that something isn't quite going right. So how can we build that in? So some of the open classes have built on the idea that the conversation begins before the classroom door starts, is open rather. So we're engaging in notes taking, working on the notion of the flipped classroom. So the lab in the bag scheme helps both inside how we design the teaching experience and the learning experience, but equally provides 24/7 hour access to the software, and the students, upon successful completion, keep it. So that idea of transition into business is there.
Can I just add to that? We make a promise to all of our students. We provide them with either, and it's for the academics in the department to decide, either the textbooks which are core to their year, so each year they get a bundle of several £100 worth of textbooks, or in the media department they get the MacBook. It's just part of the tuition fee change. We thought that it was going to be the case that students would expect and would require more access to information, and it was just part of the way we built our offer post-2012.
Thank you. It was really disruptive to hear that you said the book in the 15th century was really the most disruptive technology in that time. To me, okay, it was disruptive to break out the information and words and all, in some sense, some sort of disasters for some people. Mm-hmm. Now that the same things seems to happen in the classroom or in the university, in the educators, like who has some worries and concerns about new technology. How would you say those people who are really concerning about the same disruption may happen just like some centuries ago when the book was introduced? How would you say about that? How would you advise them?
I mean, I think, you know, I'm talking tomorrow at we're part of the series of open access roadshows. And the book that I mentioned at the beginning, the plug for New Photoscapes, is a book that kind of questions what's happening in terms of photography. So it's the first book that I have written, as opposed to had, where it was very much about the work and the images that I made. Built on this sense that the book has always been fluid. You know, it's very easy for us to see it as this, you know, there was another picture I took in an antiques kind of place that sort of showed these kind of rusty old dust-gathered kind of artifacts. But the book has always been fluid. You know, the very first kind of transcripts had multiple crossings out, narratives running through it. I think, you know, we, through commercialization, have enforced upon a particular take of what the book is. So I think, you know, the starting point for us, and the reason the lab is about disruptive media and taking that from kind of business where technologies have been, or through technology, it is disrupting kind of networks and kind of processes in business, is what happens when you bring that into a university. So the university could quite clearly have invested in a digital lab. So in other words, what we would do is buy in loads of technology. Whereas actually, if you look at the transformation that's taking place and exploring that with staff and students, so the bulk of the investment is very much about enabling and running workshops for staff to essentially break the university. For us, it is our way of kind of exploring the book today.
What we're trying to say is not that everyone must become completely up to date with all of the technologies. Impossible. We don't even want that. What we want to say is there are lots of places inside the university for lots of different ways of behaving, so long as it fits into this idea of community and this idea of excitement and engagement. And so what we're trying to do is to create, what we're actually starting to say is that the traditional role, or the role that's developed over the last 30 years of the academic in the university like ours, which is where the academic does just about everything, is changing. And we need to define a series of new roles. The idea of the curator, the idea of the technologist, the idea of the librarian within the course team, who has a very different role, perhaps in a flipped classroom type mode, for example. And defining all of those people as part of the academic team and the course team, I think should give comfort to the person, perhaps like myself, who isn't up to date with all of the technologies, and has no hope of keeping up to date with the students. I don't want to keep up to date with the students. The students have their own space. What I want to do is to make sure that we provide them with the very best education, so that they can then make sense of the future in the very best way that they possibly can. And I think that's the direction that it's taking us.
Any other kind of questions?
Yes, I'm coming from like an adult education experience where I actually work. It's very much tied in, I think, with wanting to please Ofsted.
Right.
And I was just wondering, with your model, how Ofsted actually receive it.
We're very fortunate we don't have to satisfy Ofsted, and I'm very delighted that we don't. I mean, I understand absolutely that you have an enormous constraint with Ofsted and persuading them to step outside any models. We have QAA, they don't step into the classroom, they wouldn't dream of being able to step into the classroom. And so we define what goes on in the classroom, and effectively that's why the student voice is so important, because they're the, as the users, consumers, or as students actually, they're the people that we need to respond to and answer to effectively.
I mean, I think it is interesting because, my previous role was very much around kind of curriculum development. So I used to oversee all the undergrad and postgrad courses. Not too long ago, we were talking about one of the projects that we were doing here, and somebody sort of said, well, how would that fit into a MID, which are the module descriptors? Essentially, people kind of regard them as the contract with the students. When you have lectures, right, there aren't any lectures, or self-guided. I think in all of this, we need to become conscious of the terms that we're using. And I think the positive thing of not being kind of constrained in that way means we should be in charge of thinking, because traditionally it's like, right, they have to lecture. We want to make sure there's content, so we need to make sure there are 10 hours of lecture delivery inside that module. Not because it needs 10 hours or that 10 hours lecture, one-to-many kind of delivery is the most effective way of doing it, but because of our kind of insecurity in a way in terms of believing what we're about. And I think Ian, I think, picks up on a really important thing. When your institution says a course team isn't just the academics or in my department, the technical staff associated to the department, when it's actually the university's IT department, so in other words, the infrastructure that kind of governs and enables what we do. It's also the subject librarians, and it's also the research team who are exploring learning and teaching kind of methodologies and practices.
The students.
I haven't finished yet. Essentially when the course team is everybody, all of those different areas, then I think, we can get some interesting and exciting ways of working. But yes, the students, Ian.
Hello.
Hello.
Why go to university if there's open access and the world is constructivist?
You tell me. I don't know. I mean, what I suppose one of the things that the lab is seeking to explore, our courses are online for free at the moment. The belief is, and I'm not even going to talk about the buzzword from 2012, but was that people seek accreditation from a university. I sort of think we need to be doing far more than that. What we found by working with open education and open access is it can change how we work. So, it enables publishers to rethink what their role in this mix is. It enables me as an educator to kind of rethink what my role is in that classroom. Why people are coming, I think this is what I think we're working really hard at Coventry to really think about that delivery and the experience that they're receiving. You could model it similarly around kind of, the unbundling and the streaming of music. Why are we going to just simply plug in, most online learning is pretty dire, bad teaching and learning experience. So if we're saying we don't want that in a classroom, why are we going to suddenly say we want that to be online in that same format? So I think that space, then we can start exploring other ways of working. Not really answered your question, but...
You have obviously done something very good because your students have voted you #1 for student experience. But what are the challenges that you think your students experience with this new and innovative approach?
Do you want to start, Ian?
Very happily, yes. The students don't see it as new and innovative. The students are way ahead of where we're getting to. We're trying to catch up. How many, for those of you that are subject to Ofsted, I work a lot with schools, and I go into lots of schools, and I say to them, what's your policy on mobile telephones? Oh, we take them off students, and or we tell them to turn them off, or, I'm really looking forward, and it still hasn't happened in Coventry, to walking into a lecture theatre and hearing someone say, switch on your mobile phone because you've got access to so much information, much more than I'm going to be able to provide in the next 50 minutes of lecture. The students are doing all of these things. They're using technology in all sorts of interesting ways, way ahead of us, and are accessing much more information. The disadvantage they have is they haven't got the amount of experience we have in our subject. So it's about us bringing our experience, which comes with time served and age and focus on the subject, to them and their new way, and bringing the two together. That's why it is a partnership, so that we can help mediate the sources that they're accessing. We can help mediate and understand some of the information that's out there, of which there's absolutely tons of great stuff, but there's even more junk. And it's about how we work in that partnership. And I really do think that in 30 years' time, the classroom will be a very different place. Particularly the university classroom will be a very different place. It will be much more co-creational. It will be much more our students and us working together to develop knowledge, or new understanding from the existing knowledge. So I don't think the students are at all worried. The person that's most worried is the aging professor of mechanical engineering. Being a mechanical engineer myself, I sympathise deeply with this person who just doesn't get it anymore, because when they were a student in the 1960s, obedience, the lecture, 6% of people went into higher education, and it was a very different sort of place. And their experience, therefore, is now very out of date in terms of delivering to 45% of the population who are working in a very technologically connected sort of place. So we have a huge amount of catching up to do in higher education, and that's what we're trying to do now. But we're trying to demonstrate to the students at the same time that whilst we're not trying to be them, that we're trying to respond to their developing needs.
I mean, I think, the best description I would give it is Howard Rheingold has got a term that he calls crap detection. So in other words, when we're seeking to navigate kind of these digitally connected kind of worlds, crap detection is key. So in other words, the same way I used to talk to students about kind of a bibliography, when they were writing around photography or arts and design. Perhaps that is a vehicle for you to see for new ways of exploring, creating a practice. So in other words, if you're looking at art directors, who has made these things? How do you make it a reality? And what does that mean for you? So crap detection is this term that Howard Rheingold kind of uses in terms of when we're looking at information, how do we know how much we can trust it? Or who do we know we can trust in this kind of realm? So I think, what Ian's talking about here, it very much is around this mutual respect and trust. And we know that social networks are built on that on that sort of premise. So I think specifically in terms of arts, design and media, my sort of field comes from this sense of craft. The engagement in the classroom isn't necessarily this rote one-to-many sort of delivery. It does come from this sense of transferring a skill. Now, our skill is no longer restricted or confined by the craft. There's certain and different things that can, I think, be untapped in relation to kind of the craft of the medium. But I think, if we've always had some connection to technology, whether that was painting, whether it was authoring kind of books, then perhaps those are still there, that concept is still there. They're just becoming newly formed, and we can explore them in different ways.
Hi, I was just going to ask a question about what you do in the classroom. We've got something like 900 students doing A-levels, and obviously you've said you're not doing lectures for some of your new modules. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about what you are doing in the classroom, because you said that was the most important thing at the start.
Yeah.
Can I first of all say that the lecture is still absolutely really important? Sorry? Certainly not.
I think it's that thing that they have to be that. It's the either and.
It's about making sure that the lecture is there for the right reason. Yeah. It's about making sure that the lecture, in a lecture theatre, and I think the theatre word needs to be very much more brought to prominence, it is a piece of edutainment. It is about making sure that we engage the students and we bring something there that we can't bring in the small group or in the conversation or in the digitally mediated piece of learning or whatever. So we aren't saying that we want to get rid of the lecture, but what we are saying is we want to get rid of the lecture for its own sake, and we want it there to be something which is valuable, important. And we can all remember, I can certainly remember those key moments where you go to a lecture in your education which just catches your imagination and sets on fire the direction that you may take for the future. That's the way lectures should be, and not pre-feeding information that we may not use. The other thing we should say is at Coventry we have our teaching and learning strategy is inquiry-led. So we believe in presenting the students with really complex problems in advance of them needing the information. So we then feed the information to them post the problem, them understanding that they have lots of knowledge, but there are reasons then for us to deliver other bits to support that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in all of these things, it isn't one thing or another. So in other words, it isn't about banning the lecture, but I think that idea that you introduce a student to a complex idea inside a lecture and then immediately say, now ask some questions in the following hour when you move into a seminar, provides a certain kind of a skill set and encourages a certain way of kind of thinking for critical and analytical kind of skills. However, if you make that same content available a week before, those students who struggle in that kind of environment, in that scenario, perhaps something more can come along. So, the classic thing is, if I can go into a room and 30 people have shared a bit of information, we all go away learning 30 times as much.
Can I, just to be deeply managerial now and sort of take up my role as it really is, and show my true colours. It is about banning the lecture in certain cases. If we get student information that says this person really shouldn't be delivering in this mode, then I'll happily ban the lecture or that lecturer from that mode of delivery. That's not to say they can't do a great job. It's just to have a conversation with people to say that there are certain modes of delivery that aren't suited to us. And I think with that sort of semi-controversial statement, we're out of time. Thank you so much
for listening
to us. Thank you.